A profound chasm separated the thinking of the Greeks and Romans, defining the very trajectory of their philosophical systems. For the Greeks, philosophy was an end in itself, a pure intellectual quest for truth, an ascent to the foundational principles of existence. But for the Roman worldview, it served primarily as an arsenal of practical tools designed to tackle pressing challenges, from effective statecraft to cultivating an unyielding spirit and upholding social order. Roman minds were not captivated by the abstract metaphysical constructs that so engrossed Plato and Aristotle. The notion that the visible world was merely a faint shadow of a perfect realm of forms struck them as elegant, yet utterly useless for the active, pragmatic Roman temperament. They were not interested in speculative realities beyond sensory experience, but rather in the concrete, tangible world where one had to act, make decisions, and bear responsibility for them. While Platonism demanded deep, contemplative immersion from its adherents, the Roman elite, comprised of statesmen, generals, and administrators, valued action, oratorical prowess, and the ability to command both themselves and others above all else. For precisely this reason, Stoicism became the preeminent philosophical school in Rome. Its teachings ideally aligned with the Roman national character, which was founded upon discipline, courage, and the ability to maintain one's dignity in the face of any trial. Stoics proclaimed that while humans have no power over external events, be they the will of the gods, the vagaries of fortune, or the actions of other people, they possess absolute power over their perception of these events and their reaction to them. This doctrine taught followers to embrace life in its entirety, methodically working on themselves to free their minds from the destructive influence of fear, anger, and sorrow. However, the Romans did not limit themselves solely to a philosophy of personal resilience. An equally crucial component of their intellectual upbringing was rhetoric, which they mastered to perfection. While for the Greeks, philosophical discourse was a shared pursuit of truth, for the Romans, eloquence was the most potent weapon for persuasion, gaining authority, and waging political battles in the forum or senate. They transformed the art of rhetoric into an effective mechanism that not only allowed them to promote various philosophical views, but also to secure victories in courts, influence state decisions, and sway the masses. Thus, philosophy in Rome became inextricably intertwined with politics. A true thinker had to not merely comprehend the laws of the universe, but also know how to effectively convey their ideas to fellow citizens. Where Plato suspiciously viewed rhetoric as merely a tool for manipulation and deceit, the greatest Roman orator and philosopher Cicero saw it as the cornerstone of statecraft. Roman thought did not so much create new concepts as skillfully adapt the Greek intellectual legacy, transforming it into practical tools for real life. Stoicism granted an inner citadel of the spirit, while rhetoric provided the key to managing the external world. Unlike the Hellenes, who posed the question, "What is truth?" the Romans sought the answer to, "How does one live a good life?" It was a philosophy not of contemplation, but of action. The evolution of Roman thought did not occur in a vacuum. It was a direct consequence of the historical upheavals shaking the state. Prolonged civil wars, the collapse of the republican system, and the subsequent establishment of imperial rule forever altered not only Rome's political, but also its spiritual landscape. In this era of brutality and uncertainty, philosophy transformed from a tool for achieving success into a means of moral survival. It was in the crucible of these crises that Roman thinkers, with renewed urgency, sought answers to perennial questions. How to preserve honor amidst chaos, how to avoid breaking under the yoke of tyranny, and how to remain human in a world ruled by brute force and betrayal. The long, agonizing decline of the Republic, spanning several generations, forced philosophy to become the last refuge for the spirit. Thus, it ceased to be an intellectual luxury and transformed into the final bastion, protecting not the state, but the very human soul. But could it truly save what was already doomed by the relentless march of history? The glorious days when the Roman Republic rested upon the unshakable foundation of its institutions, the authority of the Senate, the electoral system, and the principle of the separation of powers inexorably faded into the past. Throughout the 2nd and 1st centuries before the Common Era, this finely tuned mechanism began to falter and unravel. Growing social stratification, fierce political struggles escalating into bloody conflicts, and the transformation of legions from defenders of the state into the personal armies of ambitious generals, all of these factors eroded the foundations of the Republic. The civil wars that erupted between warring factions starkly demonstrated that neither law nor age-old traditions could any longer guarantee stability. It was at this pivotal moment that philosophy gained an entirely new, fateful significance. Romans realized that the old foundations had crumbled, and in their search for support, they turned to wisdom not as a theoretical discipline, but as a practical guide for survival in the dawning era of chaos. Thus, the staunch Republican Cicero, in his treatises, attempted to find a way to harmonize traditional values with the new, harsh political reality, proposing a model of an ideal society founded on justice and a balance of powers. Alas, his ideas proved powerless against the onslaught of dictatorship and the rule of might. It is telling that precisely during the height of the internecine wars, interest in Stoicism sharply increased in Rome. Its central tenet, the impossibility of changing the external world, but the complete ability to control oneself, proved to be an ideal answer to the pervasive violence and instability. When political events spiral out of control, the only remaining option is to control one's own emotions, fears, and actions. For many members of the Roman aristocracy, Stoicism became a kind of intellectual and spiritual refuge, allowing them to preserve their inner dignity amidst a world engulfed in the flames of war. The transition from republic to empire became a watershed, fundamentally altering the role of philosophy. Julius Caesar shattered the last illusions about the republican system, proving that real power belonged to whoever commanded the army. The subsequent cycles of civil wars following his assassination brought Octavian Augustus to power, who then founded the Roman Empire. At this moment, the philosophy of the Republic definitively yielded to the philosophy of the imperial era. If previously thinkers deliberated on the best form of government, now the focus of their reflections shifted to questions of personal moral choice under an authoritarian regime. Philosophy ceased to be a tool for political transformation and became a doctrine on the pursuit of inner freedom. This is why Stoicism reigned supreme in the minds of the Roman elite. Its prominent representatives, such as Seneca, Epictetus, and even Emperor Marcus Aurelius, lived under autocracy, but sought true freedom not in external reforms, but in internal self-improvement. They taught that true independence is independence of spirit, unreliant on the form of political governance. Thus, historical cataclysms forced Roman philosophy to evolve. From an instrument of political struggle, it transformed into a doctrine of resilience, patience, and the attainment of inner harmony. However, even in the Republic's last, convulsive years, there were still those who believed that philosophy could save not only the individual, but also the state itself. The most brilliant representative of this school of thought was Marcus Tullius Cicero, a man who attempted to fuse Hellenic wisdom with the harsh realities of Roman politics. Being primarily an orator and politician, rather than a secluded scholar, he lived and operated in a world of cutthroat intrigue, where words were weapons and philosophy a means of influence. Unlike Greek thinkers, he saw philosophy not as abstract knowledge, but as an active instrument for serving the public good, believing that the duty of a true sage was to participate in the life of the polis, defending laws and liberty. While strongly influenced by Stoicism, Cicero was by no means its blind follower. He rejected the Greek Stoics' calls for political detachment and reclusive living. Moreover, he also drew inspiration from Plato's legacy, particularly his ideas about the ideal state. In his famous treatise, Cicero developed the concept of a mixed form of government that would harmoniously combine the best features of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. He was the last great thinker of the Republic who tried, with the help of philosophy, to mend the broken state mechanism. But history had already delivered its verdict, and that verdict was final. He firmly believed that a stable state was impossible without wise leaders and robust institutions. However, unlike Plato, who dreamt of philosopher kings, Cicero, as an experienced politician, was acutely aware that in the real world, governing a country was always an art of compromise and the result of fierce struggle. An important source of ideas for him was also the skeptic school, which asserted the fundamental impossibility of attaining absolute truth. This idea resonated deeply with Cicero's worldview. He was not an adherent of any single doctrine, but rather pragmatically selected useful concepts from various teachings. His approach can be characterized as practical eclecticism. He borrowed from the Greeks what found application in Roman reality and discarded overly speculative constructs. Cicero's primary contribution to Roman thought lies in his deep conviction that a just and flourishing state cannot be built without morality. He was certain that a true leader must be wise, honest, and devoted to the law, and that citizens must be educated and capable of critical analysis. Nevertheless, his own tragic fate became a bitter testament to how challenging it is to adhere to high philosophical principles in real-world politics. In an era of dictators and prescriptions, his calls for virtue and the rule of law sounded naive. Cicero fell at the hands of his political enemies, but his works outlived him by millennia, exerting a colossal influence on the development of the European legal system, Republican thought, and even on the worldview of the founding fathers of the United States of America. He was not a great innovator in philosophy, but his titanic attempt to put it at the service of society made him one of the key figures in Rome's intellectual history. Cicero lived in an era of such political turbulence that adhering to a single dogmatic philosophical school was not merely a matter of intellectual choice, but often a matter of survival. He saw philosophy not as a rigid system, but as a flexible toolkit that needed to adapt to changing circumstances. This is precisely why his views organically combined elements of Stoicism, academic skepticism, and even certain tenets of Epicureanism. Stoicism attracted him with its ideas of virtue, self-control, and resilience in the face of fate's blows, qualities particularly valuable amidst political chaos and the constant threat of tyranny. He admired representatives of the Middle Stoa like Panaetius and Posidonius, who successfully adapted Greek doctrine for the practical Roman mind and shared their conviction that a statesman should be guided by reason, not emotion. At the same time, Cicero strongly disagreed with radical Stoics who preached complete detachment from the world. For him, philosophy was not a means of escaping politics, but on the contrary, a means for active and meaningful participation in the life of the state. Epicurus's teaching, which advocated avoiding public life and focusing on achieving personal happiness, seemed to him incompatible with civic duty. However, even here he found useful kernels, particularly sharing the idea of the necessity of overcoming the irrational fear of death and acknowledging the pursuit of moderate pleasures as part of a harmonious life. But perhaps the most profound influence on his method of thinking came from academic skepticism. The doctrine of the so-called New Academy, which asserted the impossibility of knowing ultimate truth and advocated acting on the basis of probable judgments, was ideally suited for a politician living in an era when fanatical ideological conviction could cost one's life. Cicero brilliantly mastered the rhetorical techniques of the skeptics, learning to question opponents' arguments and avoid categorical conclusions. This allowed him to maintain flexibility and adapt to changing circumstances without becoming hostage to a single doctrine. Thus, His refusal to follow a single philosophical school was not a sign of inconsistency, but the result of a deep conviction that truth is too multifaceted to be confined within the bounds of one teaching. He believed that wisdom is born not from dogma, but from dialogue. It was this dialogue of ideas which he conducted on the pages of his works that became his true legacy, an attempt to preserve reason and humanity in a world rapidly descending into darkness. But was this dialogue heard by those for whom it was intended? For Marcus Tullius Cicero, philosophy was never a rigid dogma. He perceived it as a living instrument, a practical methodology for finding well-considered and wise solutions amidst the shifting tides of life. His eclectic approach made him less a founder of a new philosophical school and more a masterful conduit, one who seamlessly wove the abstract traditions of Greek thought into the very fabric of Roman statecraft. In this sense, he wasn't merely an armchair philosopher, but an engaged citizen who leveraged the profound depths of philosophical knowledge to address the pressing challenges of his era. Cicero's intellectual legacy concerning governance and jurisprudence became one of the foundational cornerstones for shaping modern democratic models. Even though his life unfolded during the twilight and demise of the Roman Republic, his concepts of justice, the rule of law, and the common good have endured for millennia. Seminal works like On the Commonwealth and On the Laws contained ideas that, centuries later, resonated directly within the architecture of the United States Constitution, the principles of European democracies, and the fundamental concepts of human rights. The core tenet of his political philosophy was the conviction that the state ought to bow not to the whims and will of a single ruler, but to the unwavering power of law. He asserted that laws are not merely a collection of rules concocted by humans for their convenience, but a manifestation of a higher, universal reason and divine justice. True law, he deeply believed, does not originate from the decrees of rulers, but from the very nature of things itself. This thesis laid the groundwork for the doctrine of natural law, which later thinkers of the Enlightenment epoch would further develop. Cicero viewed with skepticism any pure forms of government, whether the unchecked power of the people or absolute monarchy, as he saw in each the seeds of potential tyranny. He championed the importance of the division of authority, believing that a truly resilient state must represent a harmonious fusion of disparate governmental elements. In his treatise on the Commonwealth, he meticulously described an ideal model of mixed government, where the monarchical element, consular power, the aristocratic principle, the Senate's authority, and the democratic component, the will of the popular assemblies, mutually balanced one another. It was this very concept that became the blueprint for the modern system of checks and balances. Equally pivotal was his conviction that the state exists for the flourishing of all its citizens, not for the enrichment of a select few. Justice, according to Cicero, had to be the bedrock of society, and the duty of rulers was to act solely in the people's best interest. Despite emerging from the realities of aristocratic Rome, these ideas were many centuries ahead of their time, anticipating theories of popular sovereignty and the social responsibility of governance. Moreover, he was convinced that law alone could not safeguard a state from unraveling if its citizens lacked an inner moral compass, a profound sense of duty and justice. Thus, he became a precursor to the idea of civil society, where stability rests not only on formal institutions, but also on moral foundations. Yet, Cicero's life stands as a tragic tale of noble aspirations clashing with ruthless political reality. He vehemently strove to actualize his philosophical insights, but found himself helpless in the face of the brutal realities of first century before Common Era Rome, where the ballot was increasingly superseded by the sword. His unwavering allegiance to republican values and the rule of law entered into irreconcilable conflict with the new order being forged by ambitious dictators and generals for whom legions had become far weightier than legal authority. When Gaius Julius Caesar, backed by his devoted legions, shattered the delicate balance of republican institutions and consolidated all power in his hands, Cicero found himself in an ideological impasse. On one hand, he passionately denounced tyranny and championed freedom. On the other, he possessed no military might capable of resisting the dictatorship. Following Caesar's assassination, he embarked on a last-ditch effort to save the Republic, wielding his primary weapon, his oratorical skill and philosophical authority. He resolved to support the young and ambitious Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, in the naive hope that he would restore the old order. In his ultimate gamble, he staked everything on a single figure, little knowing that this very individual would ultimately deliver the final, crushing blow. The hopes placed in Octavian turned to dust. The young politician proved not to be a defender of the Republic, but a calculating strategist who merely cloaked himself in republican rhetoric for an unimpeded ascent to absolute power. When Cicero, true to his principles, openly challenged Mark Antony, unleashing upon him his famous Philippics, a series of fiery speeches denouncing Antony as an enemy of the state, he effectively signed his own death warrant. His political philosophy demanded that he speak truth and defend the law to the very end. But in the brutal reality of Rome in that era, the ultimate authority rested not with ideals, but with legions. When Octavian and Antony, erstwhile enemies, forged a political alliance, Cicero became a mere pawn and an inconvenient relic of the past. In 43, before Common Era, his name was placed on the proscription lists, effectively outlawing him and sealing his inevitable execution. Soldiers dispatched to apprehend him caught the philosopher as he attempted to flee. Thus, philosophy proved powerless to save its foremost Roman champion, because the politics of that time left no room whatsoever for morality and conviction. However, though the thinker's body was mortal, his ideas achieved immortality, becoming for centuries to come a cornerstone for reflections on republicanism, the rule of law, and the moral foundations of power. Despite more than 2,000 years having passed since Cicero's death, his thoughts on politics, justice, and human nature retain their incisiveness. His works are not abstract musings, but a practical guide on the art of building a just society and preserving human dignity in the face of the direst challenges. It is no coincidence that his aphorisms still resonate in the speeches of legal scholars, academics, and statesmen today. Cicero considered the rule of law to be the bedrock of any healthy society, expressing this idea in the paradoxical dictum, "We are slaves of the law in order that we may be free." This remarkably modern thesis asserts that true liberty is only possible within a just legal framework, one that applies equally to all. Another cornerstone of his teachings was the idea that true law is right reason in agreement with nature. This principle formed the bedrock of natural law theory, which posits the existence of immutable moral norms that transcend any decrees issued by humans. It was precisely this concept that later inspired Enlightenment philosophers to articulate the doctrine of human rights. Cicero was firmly convinced that authority is obligated to serve the people, not itself, formulating this in the famous phrase, "The welfare of the people is the supreme law." This motto became the creed for many democratic nations, serving as a reminder that the primary task of government is to care for the common good, not personal gain. At the same time, he cautioned against demagoguery and populism, asserting that nothing is more dangerous than a flattering foe disguised as a friend. This warning remains pertinent even today, in an era where grand pronouncements and public opinion manipulation often supplant genuine political work. One of his central convictions was the supremacy of virtue over wealth and power. "Nothing can be honorable which is not also just," he wrote, emphasizing that the formal legality of an action does not make it moral if it lacks integrity at its core. Equally vital to him was self-control. The more power, the more restraint. This is an eternal reminder that power corrupts only those who are incapable of mastering themselves. In his treatise on friendship, he called this sentiment one of the highest blessings, defining a friend as a second self, and insisting that true intimacy is built not on self-interest, but on mutual respect. In our age of superficial social media connections, this idea resonates with particular significance. And his famous saying, "If you have a garden and a library, you have everything you need," reflects his deep conviction that harmony is achieved through the contemplation of nature and spiritual cultivation. Cicero was no armchair scholar. He was a man of action, and his tragic fate serves as a stark lesson that philosophy is not always able to shield one from political brutality. Thus, the tragic demise of one thinker brought an entire era to a close, but the very struggle between philosophy and power in Rome was far from over. It was merely preparing to re-emerge in an entirely different, hitherto unseen form. Where Cicero believed in an open fight for republican values, the Stoic Lucius Annaeus Seneca, finding himself at the court of a tyrant, chose a completely different strategy, the path of careful compromises and the cultivation of inner self-mastery. This prominent Roman philosopher, statesman, and literary figure, living in the 1st century Common Era, entered history as one of the key representatives of Roman Stoicism. However, his fate unfolded uniquely. Unlike his Greek predecessors, who often advocated for withdrawal from politics, Seneca didn't merely exist in the emperor's orbit. He was the tutor and closest advisor to Nero, one of history's most sinister and infamous rulers. This paradoxical combination of serving despotic power and adhering to high philosophy made his personality deeply controversial, and his teachings a unique blend of Stoic doctrine and political pragmatism. The Stoicism Seneca followed preached that humans are powerless to change external circumstances, but fully in control of their reactions to them. It was a philosophy of inner freedom, attained through patience, self-control, and the renunciation of destructive passions. However, unlike earlier Stoics, Seneca keenly understood that in the realities of imperial Rome, complete detachment from the world was tantamount to political suicide. He opted for a more flexible approach. Instead of engaging in open confrontation with authority, he attempted to influence it from within. In his writings, he repeatedly reasoned that a wise person is obligated to use every opportunity to guide state affairs toward the good, even if it means collaborating with individuals of questionable moral standing. Many contemporaries and later generations criticized Seneca for serving Nero, but he himself justified his position by striving to guide the young emperor onto the path of virtue and to restrain him from acts of cruelty. In the early years of Nero's reign, this influence was indeed palpable. Seneca helped to soften laws, patronized philosophers, and advocated for clemency. But over time, Nero grew increasingly unpredictable and despotic, and his tutor's authority steadily dwindled. The moment arrived when Seneca realized he could no longer control the emperor, yet departing the court had also become mortally dangerous. In his celebrated works, such as Moral Letters to Lucilius and the treatise on the shortness of life, he constantly reflected on how to maintain dignity in a world dominated by violence and chaos. He taught that true freedom is not the ability to do whatever one pleases, but the capacity to remain true to one's principles regardless of external pressure. His philosophy, despite all compromises, remained a doctrine of self-possession, patience, and the courageous acceptance of one's fate. However, compromises did not save Seneca. When Nero finally decided to eliminate all his former advisors, he accused the philosopher of participating in a conspiracy and ordered him to commit suicide. Following his Stoic convictions, Seneca met death calmly and with dignity, accepting it as an inevitable end. This tragic act became a living symbol of his teachings. A person has no power over the circumstances of their life, but they can always choose how to react to them. To this day, Seneca remains one of the most complex and ambiguous figures in intellectual history. On one hand, he was a sincere Stoic, preaching virtue and self-control. On the other, he lived in luxury, served a tyrant, and according to many, did not always adhere to his own lofty ideals. But it is precisely this duality that makes his philosophy so vibrant and relatable. It speaks not of ethereal theories, but of a real attempt to preserve inner freedom in a world full of cruelty and injustice. Throughout his life, he sought a balance between the Stoic ideal and harsh Roman politics, transforming Stoicism from a speculative doctrine into a practical guide for the survival of the spirit amidst chaos. The foundation of a wise life, according to Seneca, was total self-control. He taught that passions, anger, fear, envy, destroy a person from within, turning them into a slave to their own emotions. The more control you have over yourself, the less power others have over you, he wrote. For him, strength of spirit lay not in fleeing from difficulties, but in the ability to maintain composure in the face of any trial. Seneca believed in fate, but understood it not as blind predestination, but as the natural and inexorable course of things that a wise person must accept with dignity. He saw in this concept not a reason for passivity, but on the contrary, a source of indomitable inner strength, which was intended to prepare an individual for the greatest trial of all. For him, human life unfolded like an unrelenting river. In this grand metaphor, the wise person is one who grasps the flow's direction and allows it to carry them, while the fool is one who, in a futile struggle against the currents, only deepens their suffering. The essence of this profound insight is encapsulated in his famous aphorism: "The universe gently guides those who accept its laws and relentlessly drags along those who resist." This, however, is not a call to blind fatalism, but a deep understanding that while external circumstances are often beyond our control, our internal reaction to them always remains within our sphere of influence. In his philosophy, suffering appears not as divine punishment, but as an intrinsic element of existence, a crucible designed to fortify the spirit. He drew a direct parallel between hardship and athletic training. Just as consistent physical exertion builds strong and resilient muscles, so too do life's blows temper character, forging something indestructible. As he himself wrote, "Much like a flame purifies gold of its impurities, so does a succession of misfortunes reveal one's true metal, separating the strong-willed from the weak." Great individuals, in his conviction, are not those who manage to evade life's tempests, but rather those who have learned to harness their destructive energy for personal growth and refinement. He urged us to view adversity not as tragedies, but as unique opportunities to test our inner fortitude and hone our virtues. It was precisely this approach that transformed Seneca's philosophy into an eminently practical guide for living. He harbored no illusions about the world's fairness, acknowledging its chaotic and cruel nature. But he insisted that true freedom is found not in comfort, but in the courageous conquest of obstacles. His teaching was not about how to construct a life devoid of pain, but about how to confront that pain with dignity and prevent it from crushing one's spirit. In this lies the enduring value of his legacy. It teaches us not to flee from life, but to bravely meet it head-on. Seneca did not confine himself to abstract discussions of self-control. He developed an entire arsenal of specific mental exercises designed to help manage destructive emotions, anxiety, and fears. He clearly saw that in a world brimming with uncertainty, worry often casts a long shadow over humanity. However, the root of the problem, in his view, lies not in the events themselves, but in our interpretation of those events. The philosopher believed that the key to inner peace lay in mindfulness, reasoned preparation for the future, and relentless daily self-improvement. One of the core techniques in his toolkit was the premeditation of evils, or praemeditatio malorum. He advised regularly and vividly imagining potential misfortunes, from losing possessions to falling gravely ill, so that if they ever materialized, the mind would already be braced for the impact. A person who has mentally navigated an ordeal ceases to panic at its prospect, for the primary source of fear is not the misfortune itself, but its suddenness and the unknown. Another crucial method was a deep contemplation of the ephemeral nature of all things. Seneca tirelessly reminded us that nothing lasts forever, neither wealth, nor power, nor health, nor life itself. Yet this awareness should lead not to despair, but to a heightened appreciation for the present moment. He chastised those who lived as if granted eternity, perpetually postponing life. This practice weans one from destructive attachment to material possessions and compels action in the here and now. For systematic self-improvement, he also recommended keeping a philosophical journal. At the end of each day, one should conduct an impartial self-examination, asking oneself, what did I do correctly? Where could I have acted more wisely? What challenge today strengthened my spirit? Yet another principle was the practice of deliberate self-restraint. Seneca advised occasionally choosing to live in conditions akin to poverty, eating simple food, sleeping on a hard surface, wearing modest attire. The goal was not asceticism itself, but a training of the spirit, a powerful reminder that true happiness does not hinge on external comfort. By periodically experiencing the life of a pauper, one ceases to panic at the thought of poverty, gaining resilience and shedding the fear of losing customary comforts. Finally, he considered the development of gratitude to be the most vital art, asserting that most people suffer not from a lack of anything, but from an inability to appreciate what they already possess. All these philosophical exercises were designed not to shield one from difficulties, but to radically transform one's outlook on them. Seneca taught that anxiety and fear are merely phantoms of the mind, which can be dissipated through sheer willpower and discipline. And yet, one of the most intriguing paradoxes surrounding his figure was his immense wealth. As a champion of Stoicism, which advocated for indifference to material possessions, he was one of the wealthiest men in Rome and lived in unrivaled luxury. The philosopher himself explained this apparent contradiction simply. Stoicism condemns not wealth itself, but a slavish attachment to it. But it is one thing to proclaim such a principle, and quite another to adhere to it when the threads of your wealth and influence are interwoven with the very pinnacle of power. Seneca tirelessly reiterated that true wealth is measured not by the amount of money, but by the scope of one's needs. As he claimed, true wealth belongs not to those who possess much, but to those who are content with little. Within his value system, a Stoic could indeed possess substantial resources, but with one crucial caveat. These resources must not enslave their mind or dictate their will. Secondly, he viewed wealth as a tool that, when properly wielded, could serve virtue. In his letters, he emphasized that money opened opportunities to help fellow humans, to lead an enlightened life, to delve deeply into philosophy, and to provide support to other wise individuals. Money, he famously stated, is an excellent servant, but the worst of masters. Thus, he perceived his fortune not as an end in itself, but as a means for educating others and disseminating Stoic ideals. Thirdly, Seneca explained his position through its historical context. He was not merely a hermit philosopher, but also an influential statesman, holding key positions at the court of Emperor Nero. In Rome of that era, power and money were inextricably linked, and to preserve his influence, as well as to protect other thinkers, he needed to maintain a status befitting the elite. He was convinced that voluntary poverty, when one has the opportunity to use wealth for the good of society, was not a virtue, but a senseless extreme. Yet, Seneca himself never considered wealth a guarantee of happiness. He actively preached moderation and advocated for periodically foregoing comfort to avoid becoming enslaved by luxury. For him, this practice was a path to inner freedom. A person, in his view, should be able to enjoy life's blessings, but be ready to part with them at any moment without regret. Seneca did not deny that wealth was a great temptation, but he believed that a true Stoic was capable of possessing it without becoming its prisoner. Unlike Cicero, who saw money as a lever of political influence, or the Epicureans, who sought seclusion, Seneca utilized his fortune as a platform for disseminating philosophy. His departure from life became as cool-headed and deliberate an act as his entire existence, a final chord where philosophy and action merged into one. In the year 65 of the Common Era, when Emperor Nero, consumed by paranoia, began to see conspiracies everywhere, Seneca found himself among the suspects. Despite the absence of any evidence, Nero, who had long sought to be rid of his influential mentor, ordered his suicide. Seneca met this verdict without a trace of panic, understanding that life under the heel of a tyrant, sooner or later, leads to such an end. Following Stoic tradition, he did not debase himself with pleas for mercy, but accepted his fate with unwavering dignity. He opened his veins, but due to his advanced age and weakened body, death did not come. Even in these agonizing moments, he maintained absolute composure, conversing with friends and comforting them, reminding them that death is merely a natural part of the life cycle. When the bleeding proved too slow, he drank poison, but it too failed to take effect. Only immersion in a hot bath, where the steam and warmth hastened the process, finally ended his life. This episode forever cemented Seneca's image as a sage who not only preached self-control, but demonstrated it at the most decisive moment. He did not fight the inevitable. Instead, he departed the world as consciously as he had lived, affirming the core tenet of Stoicism. Humanity has no power over its destiny, but it always has power over its reaction to it. Even though 2,000 years separate us from Seneca, his philosophy continues to resonate deeply with contemporary leaders, entrepreneurs, and politicians. Many successful individuals draw inspiration from his ideas on self-discipline, emotional control, and the acceptance of the inevitable. For example, Apple co-founder Steve Jobs was known for his minimalism and acute awareness of life's finitude, which, he claimed, helped him focus on what truly mattered. His famous declaration that remembering one's imminent death is the best tool for making momentous decisions directly echoes Seneca's thoughts. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, in turn, often emphasizes the importance of long-term thinking and emotional management, a direct reflection of the Stoic belief in the power of a calm mind. Even Elon Musk, renowned for his impulsiveness, demonstrates elements of Stoic resilience in his approach to overcoming colossal difficulties. Perhaps it is this very ability of Seneca's philosophy to adapt to the challenges of any era that makes it immortal, offering not just comfort, but a genuine tool for navigating the chaos of existence. He does not falter in the face of setbacks, viewing them as an integral part of any significant journey, and his remarkable capacity to act under conditions of total uncertainty reflects a profound Stoic acceptance of fate. Investor and PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel is an active proponent of Stoicism, asserting that the ideas of these ancient thinkers help him maintain crystalline clarity of mind amidst the fiercest competitive struggles. Thus, Seneca's philosophy continues its life into the 21st century, serving as a bedrock for people striving to maintain composure when facing challenges, manage their emotions, and accept reality as it is. Seneca's philosophy became a school for accepting the inevitable, managing emotions, and preserving dignity in the face of cruelty and death. His ideas profoundly influenced generations of thinkers, but perhaps their most famous and consistent champion was the Roman emperor Marcus Aurelius. If Seneca was a philosopher compelled to serve a despot, then Marcus Aurelius was a ruler who himself became the embodiment of philosophy on the throne. He did not merely contemplate virtue and self-control, but transformed Stoicism into a practical tool for governing the vast and perpetually tumultuous Roman Empire. Marcus Aurelius became a philosopher-emperor not by chance. From a young age, he was surrounded by the finest tutors and plunged headfirst into the study of philosophy, finding in Stoicism a resonance with his thoughts on duty, patience, and the supremacy of reason. When Emperor Hadrian recognized the young man's outstanding abilities, he designated him as his successor. However, Marcus Aurelius's reign was infinitely far from an idyllic world of philosophical discourse. He spent most of his life engaged in military campaigns, repelling barbarian raids, quelling rebellions, and curbing the empire's internal crises. It was in the crucible of these trials that Stoicism became his lifeline, helping him maintain clarity of thought, strength of spirit, and an unwavering sense of responsibility to his people. As emperor, he was guided by the Stoic principle that power is not a privilege, but a heavy burden. He firmly believed that a ruler must first learn to govern themselves before attempting to govern others. He did not seek luxury and pleasure, unlike many of his predecessors, but led a modest, almost ascetic life, dedicating himself entirely to serving the state. Stoicism helped him accept difficulties without complaint. Surrounded by betrayal, wars, and epidemics, he reminded himself that all these were merely manifestations of the natural order of things. As he wrote, "One can endlessly fret about the thorns on a rose, but they will remain there regardless of your emotions." Another key principle he applied in governance was the idea of a universal reason and the common good. He believed that all human beings are parts of a single organism, and their purpose is to help one another, for what benefits the hive also benefits the bee. This principle became the foundation of his policy. He strived for justice, eased the tax burden for the poorest segments of the population, strengthened the legal system, and championed social stability. Philosophy also helped him cope with personal tragedies. He lost many children and endured betrayal from his closest companions, yet he continued to see the will of Providence in these events. His renowned Meditations is a unique philosophical document that was not originally intended for public eyes. Unlike other thinkers who created treatises for students, Marcus Aurelius kept this journal exclusively for himself. He used Stoicism not as a theoretical doctrine, but as a practical guide for action during the darkest moments of his life. Instead of allowing power to corrupt him, he used philosophy to make his rule wiser. It's as if, in addressing himself within the pages of his private journal, he was, in truth, engaged in a profound dialogue with eternity, tirelessly seeking answers to questions that remain utterly timeless. These writings weren't meant for public consumption, nor were they an academic treatise or a political manifesto. Instead, what we hold is an intimate journal of contemplation, a private chronicle of struggle where a great emperor sought spiritual grounding in Stoic philosophy to endure the immense burdens fate had placed upon him. Most of these entries weren't penned in the gleaming splendor and comfort of Rome, but amidst the harsh realities of military camps and arduous campaigns, where the ruler confronted himself and the stark truth of existence. Within these pages, he repeatedly revisited the core tenets of Stoicism, methodically reminding himself of the unwavering nature of duty, the intrinsic value of virtue, the necessity of humility, and the sheer fortitude required to navigate adversity. More than anyone, he grasped that as emperor, he lacked the power to alter the dictates of fate, yet he held absolute dominion over his own reactions to unfolding events. His writings are permeated with profound meditations on accepting the inevitable and safeguarding an inner sanctuary of calm amidst life's relentless storms. The central theme, weaving its way through all his works, is that while the external world remains beyond our control, our response to it is a realm of absolute personal power. The emperor famously declared, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find true strength." This foundational tenet of Stoic wisdom hasn't lost its keen edge in the modern world. Today, just as in his time, people grapple with chaos, crises, and relentless stress, yet it is precisely the ability to master the flow of one's thoughts and emotional responses that bestows unshakable resilience. Another crucial leitmotif woven through his book is a keen awareness of the fleeting nature of human existence. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that all things in this world are transient. Boundless power, untold riches, and even the most agonizing suffering. All things fade into oblivion, some into the memory of generations, others into matter itself. Remember this, and your spirit will know no anxiety, he wrote, offering a universal antidote to worry and a path to focus on what truly matters. For him, true personal greatness was not defined by title or lineage, but solely by one's actions. He bequeathed to posterity not merely advice, but a direct call to action. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. This universal law of ethics remains relevant in every age, asserting the supremacy of tangible deeds over empty rhetoric. The value of his reflections is immeasurably amplified by their profound sincerity. These are not detached teachings from a philosopher contemplating life from the comfort of his study, but the vibrant words of a man who daily made the most arduous decisions, confronting pain, betrayal, and the bitterness of loss. Marcus Aurelius was not a flawless Stoic. He doubted, he erred, but he relentlessly strove to live in harmony with the ideals he championed. It is precisely why, nearly 2,000 years later, his work remains one of the most sought-after philosophical texts. It contains no complex theoretical constructs or academic dryness, only a distilled essence of practical wisdom, helping us to gracefully meet the challenges of existence. Its pages are studied by entrepreneurs and politicians, military leaders and psychologists, and indeed by everyday people seeking an island of serenity in the tumultuous ocean of modern life. For him, philosophy wasn't an abstract doctrine, but a regimen of daily practices. His ideas teach not only the art of governing a state, but far more crucially, the art of governing oneself. One of the central tenets of his worldview is the capacity to perceive difficulties as disguised opportunities. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way, he declared. This idea upends conventional thinking. Problems and setbacks aren't reasons for despair, but invaluable resources for growth, new insights, and the forging of character. Whether in business, sports, or personal relationships, this mindset prevents us from throwing in the towel, instead compelling us to find in every crisis the springboard for a future triumph. Equally vital to him was the idea of a serene detachment from the judgments of others. He would prepare himself for each day as if in a ritual. Today, I shall meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. Yet, he added, they are this way not by malice, but by ignorance. This internal discipline teaches us to perceive others' behavior without emotional flares, avoiding the wasteful expenditure of precious energy on anger, and preventing external factors from dictating our inner state. In an age of social media and pervasive public pressure, this principle helps to preserve self-esteem and prevent dependency on external opinions. He also stressed the importance of daily self-discipline, concluding each day by analyzing his actions, what was done correctly and what needed correction. This practice of evening reflection, easily adaptable for contemporary individuals through journaling, helps one clearly see their mistakes and systematically improve themselves. The key to inner peace, Marcus Aurelius taught, lies not in avoiding problems, but in correctly assessing them. If something causes you pain, it's not the thing itself that's to blame, but your judgment about it. And that judgment, you have the power to change at any moment. Thus was born the central paradox of his legacy. The more boundless the emperor's power over the world became, the clearer he realized that the true battle for control was waged in the one territory beyond his dominion, within his own soul. In our constantly shifting modern reality, these ideas become an invaluable tool for maintaining mental clarity, uncovering hidden opportunities within difficulties, and steadily moving forward, free from fear. Marcus Aurelius, through his entire reign, strived to embody wisdom and dignity, aligning every step with rigorous Stoic principles. Yet, his own son and heir, Commodus, became a living and tragic refutation of everything his father believed in, a cruel, despotic, and immensely vain ruler. This stark contrast spawned one of philosophy's key questions. Is it possible to pass on wisdom and virtue through inheritance, like a title or a fortune? Commodus, nurtured in an atmosphere of luxury and privilege, displayed not the slightest interest in philosophy or the complex art of statecraft, unlike his father. Marcus Aurelius's decision to appoint him as his successor remains one of the most controversial and tragic chapters of his legacy. Perhaps the great Stoic held out hope until the very end that his son would change over time, or that he could be guided onto the path of virtue. But philosophy, unlike power, does not flow in one's veins. It can only be consciously chosen and cultivated within oneself through the crucible of personal experience. From his early years, Commodus was surrounded by flatterers and court schemers who indulged his basest weaknesses. He resented the burden of responsibility that came with being a ruler, seeking solace in endless amusements, preferring bloody gladiatorial contests, extravagant feasts, and blatant cruelty. If Marcus Aurelius viewed power as a heavy duty and a service, Commodus saw it merely as personal property, to be used without restraint for his own pleasure. Philosophy demands strict internal discipline and an understanding that life consists not only of pleasures, but also of obligations. Commodus, however, built his life on a single principle, the immediate gratification of his every whim. He easily dismissed his father's wise advisors, ruthlessly eliminated all potential rivals, and plunged the administration of a vast empire into a maelstrom of chaos, conspiracies, and violence. The logical outcome of his reign was one of the most unstable periods in Roman history, and his own life ended abruptly through betrayal and assassination. This striking contrast between father and son serves as the most compelling evidence that Stoicism is not an innate quality, but the result of a deliberate life choice. No philosophical treatises, no wise counsel can make a person virtuous if they do not strive for it themselves. Marcus Aurelius managed to bestow upon his son power over an entire empire, but found himself powerless to bestow his own wisdom. This lesson remains profoundly relevant today. True values, character, and worldview cannot be inherited. They can only be forged independently through daily effort and deep reflection. During the Renaissance, European thinkers rediscovered the works of Marcus Aurelius, seeing in him the quintessential philosopher king. His contemplations on the moral bedrock of power, on societal responsibility, and on the ephemeral nature of all things exerted a profound influence on the development of the humanist tradition. Later, Enlightenment figures like Montesquieu and Rousseau meticulously studied his legacy, finding in Stoicism a foundation for rational governance. The 18th and 19th centuries became a period when the emperor's Stoic philosophy inspired existentialist thinkers. His idea that humanity is not master of its fate, but holds complete dominion over its reaction to it, resonated deeply in the works of Søren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Jean-Paul Sartre. The postulate that the meaning of existence lies in recognizing one's place in the cosmos and embracing one's role became a central theme of existential philosophy. In the 20th century, Marcus Aurelius's Stoicism unexpectedly became a cornerstone of cognitive behavioral therapy. His principles of mindfulness, emotional regulation, and the clear distinction between what lies within our control and what remains beyond it formed the bedrock for many modern psychological practices. Popular contemporary techniques for emotional self-regulation, such as reframing and mindfulness, are largely a reinterpretation of the Stoic methods described by the Roman emperor. In the modern world, His ideas are actively applied by entrepreneurs, executives, and athletes. For example, investor and author Ryan Holiday has made Stoicism accessible to a broad audience, dedicating his books to how Marcus Aurelius's principles aid in achieving success in business and personal growth. Leaders of major corporations employ his philosophy for making sound decisions under immense pressure, while athletes use it for managing emotions and maintaining peak concentration on results. Thus, Marcus Aurelius didn't merely leave behind a philosophical legacy. He transformed Stoicism into a genuine philosophy of action. His teachings on discipline, self-control, and the acceptance of the inevitable continue to inspire millions of people striving to attain wisdom and unyielding resilience in the face of life's many challenges. And so, a teaching born amidst arduous military campaigns achieved immortality, proving that an empire of the spirit can endure longer than any earthly dominion. Cicero's body of work represents a majestic foundation upon which Roman political and legal thought rests. In his treatises On the Republic and On the Laws, he meticulously explores the very nature of power, the unshakable role of law, and the contours of an ideal social structure. In works like On the Orator and Brutus, he unveils the secrets of oratorical artistry, and in one of his most celebrated pieces, On Duties, he offers a practical guide to harmoniously blending lofty moral principles with the realities of public and political life. These works are not merely historical artifacts, they are invaluable handbooks for sharpening skills in argumentation, the art of persuasion, and strategic thinking. Seneca's path led in a different direction. He addressed not the structure of the state, but the structure of the soul, exploring not politics, but the art of personal resilience in the face of life's storms. His Moral Letters to Lucilius are not dry philosophical treatises, but intimate conversations with a friend, a collection of priceless advice on how to rein in emotions, accept the inevitable with dignity, and maintain inner grandeur under any circumstances. The treatise On the Shortness of Life is a powerful call to stop squandering invaluable days on trivial concerns and to start living every moment consciously. In On Tranquility of Mind, he offers practical methods for finding inner harmony amidst a chaotic world, and in On the Happy Life, he meticulously dissects the very nature of genuine happiness. These works serve as an indispensable spiritual compass for anyone seeking practical guidance on self-improvement and cultivating emotional stability. Marcus Aurelius left behind Meditations, perhaps the most renowned philosophical diary in world history. It is not a book in the conventional sense, but a sacred chronicle, personal notes in which a mighty emperor, alone with himself, reflected on the meaning of existence, the nature of fate, the irrevocability of duty, and the ability to maintain a clear mind in the face of adversity. The value of this work is immeasurable precisely because it was written not by a detached theoretician, but by an active ruler who daily used Stoicism as a practical tool for governing a colossal empire and for waging a continuous battle against his own weaknesses and trials. To truly grasp the profound depth of these ancient texts, it's immensely helpful to also consult the works of contemporary scholars who act as interpreters, translating timeless wisdom into the language of our own era. For instance, Pierre Hadot's book, Philosophy as a Way of Life, Spiritual Exercises from Socrates to Foucault, illuminates how the emperor's Stoicism was inextricably woven into the very fabric of his daily life and his decisions as a statesman. Ryan Holiday, in his bestsellers The Daily Stoic and The Obstacle is the Way, brilliantly adapts the insights of these Roman thinkers to the challenges of modern business and the pursuits of personal growth. And James Romm, in his work Dying Every Day, Seneca at the Court of Nero, offers a profound analysis of Seneca's philosophy and its monumental influence on all of Western civilization. Delving into these works compellingly reveals that the legacy of Cicero, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius is not a frozen relic of the past, but a vibrant, relevant guide for anyone striving to cultivate wisdom, resilience, and the art of living a life of integrity in this complex and unpredictable world. As we immerse ourselves in their writings, we make a startling discovery. Though the stage settings, technologies, and political maps have undergone radical transformations, the fundamental challenges facing the human soul remain constant.